was having a rough night. It was close to 3 in the morning, and I wasn't any closer to sleeping than I was several hours ago. So I had taken my laptop downstairs with my book with the intention that maybe I could get some writing done. But the change of scenery still seemed to do nothing for my poor state. Flipping through my rough drafts, I came across the line I had written about Flash games in my Elden Ring script. And it gave me an idea to boot up Flash games to try to boost my sour mood. I mean, at that point, I truly thought it couldn't hurt to try. When I loaded onto that page, I clicked on Parking Simulator and the game with the parking lights. I know, it's the lamest games possible, but I used to play those all the time when I was a kid. I remember perfecting that game when I was stuck for hours in after-school care back in my elementary school days. And for the next 15 minutes or so, my sour mood was, well, a little less sour. The mundane anxieties that had been running their way through my head lowered their volume ever so slightly. It was in the middle of playing one of these silly games that I realized truly just how strong the power of nostalgia is.
Yellow creature gobbles dots while being pursued through maze by monsters. Believe it or not, those things are really happening on 200 electronic video games here at Chicago Fest. What you see here is part of a national phenomenon that we call high-tech rec, a phenomenon that had to happen when the TV set married the computer.
And the first things that came to me were a lot of questions. Like, how far in the past does something have to be to have the feeling of nostalgia? What's the purpose of nostalgia? Like, on a biological level, is there anything that evolution thought would be helpful about this feeling to have us so motivated by it? How come I often forget these things that make me feel so happy? Like these Flash games, I forget entirely that they exist until I happen to come across something to remind me of them. And the same applies for so many other things that would trigger nostalgia for me. Is forgetting about those things just a me thing? Or do other people experience that too? Or is the process of forgetting about it what makes it nostalgic to begin with? Maybe there are different kinds of nostalgia. And why do we love it so much? The feeling. Because when I look deeper into myself, at least, it's not 100% a purely happy feeling. There's a subtle undertone somewhere in all of that warm fuzz that carries with it the weight of knowing that a lot of time has passed. A lot of time that I can never get back, and sometimes even giving me a slightly unhopeful feeling that suggests maybe the best times of my life have come and passed. Because as warm as nostalgia can feel at times, it can very easily slip into a sadder place, at least for me. Like while looking through old photos, at first with a laugh and a smile as you remember back to friends or moments that you may have forgotten, they can turn into a wistful longing of sorts, if not careful. So, still being unable to sleep and motivated by all these questions, I got to doing some research, but while I went in search of answers, I ended up finding things that just had me asking more questions. And, well, it was a lot darker than I thought it could be. Video games. Since their introduction in the 70s with Pong, and their quickly growing popularity throughout the 80s and 90s with arcades and small consoles, video games quickly became a cultural icon of the times. The newest game could act as an indicator for the year it was, and ever since, they have been an important role in people's memory of their childhood. For me, quickly hiding my DS under my pillow before my mom came in is the most common example that comes to mind. I remember this one time when I was quite little. I played Cars on the PlayStation 2. And yes, I am aware of the car trend I have going on here. And I had played it for so long in my dark, dingy basement that I guess I had gotten a bit motion sick. At some point, my mom dropped off some McDonald's to me, the little gremlin in the basement. And I remember just as Shock was in the middle of changing Lightning McQueen's tire, suddenly getting overwhelmed by this motion sickness. And I ran upstairs because I knew I was about to throw up. And I only had time to look my mother dead in the eye. I wasn't able to get any words out before a fresh batch of McDonald's fries exited their way from my stomach. I find it kind of funny every time I think about it. There's just a lot of memories of my childhood that are associated with video games. I mean, all I need to do is hear one of those iconic sounds and I'm taken back. I'll be taken back to playing Minecraft with my friends until 8 a.m. on a summer night, watching the sun come up through the window. Or it brings me back a memory of my friends and I filling an entire flat world on the Xbox 360 with water. Not flowing water, like entirely filled with solid water. And even as I'm writing this now, I feel happy. A bittersweet happy, if that makes any sense. So I went and searched to see how many other people experience strong nostalgia with video games, and it turns out quite a few. Even though our hardware and software has progressed exponentially since the arcade days, as a gaming community, we continue to develop and make games that are reminiscent of the original look and sound of these older arcade games, sometimes with our modern twist. We are at the mind-blowing point in tech and video game history, in which we are capable of having video games that are able to render scenes and people that border on the line of looking completely realistic. But see, the tricky thing with analyzing video games and its relationship to nostalgia is the rapid progression that technology has had. Prominent researchers of nostalgia, and yeah, apparently this topic is something that fascinates many researchers and scientists, enough that there are places focused on this, have expressed trouble analyzing video games on the same level that they do with fashion or cultural references, due to the nature of how fast the technology has evolved. Even a 5-year difference can create a whole new category of which games could be classified as nostalgic when looking at a generation of kids. Video games present a unique context within which to study nostalgia because they carry with them associations of childhood, but also the progression of technology, which ties into it an overall cultural shift due to the technology. Basically, in short and simpler terms, video games might not just be nostalgic just because it's a video game. Rather, it is embedded in a deeper layer of where the world's current technological progression was, which, as a whole, would shape the way our culture and world worked. And that's why it might be such a strong feeling of nostalgia for so many people. And when trying to answer my own question about why we might have this feeling on a biological level, I came across answers that implied it had to do with fortitude and perseverance. For example, take this quote: "Nostalgia is also thought to be important in emotional resilience. By looking at the past, one can sometimes look to the future even when getting bogged down by the pain of the present." Which makes sense. We can go back to revisit a better time and know that it is possible to achieve that again. And when doing research, it seems like the use of older video games was actually encouraged to treat some people with PTSD and depression. There was even a whole study done about how the Pokemon Go mobile game had contributed to individuals' overall levels of well-being because of the use of nostalgia. Some psychologists have also suggested that it may be used as a coping mechanism. People who experience depression and anxiety are more likely to experience feelings of nostalgia more frequently. And it was when I was researching this side of nostalgia that I stumbled upon something kinda dark. Nostalgia is a forgotten mental disorder. The year is 1690, and you are struggling to eat. After enduring yet another battle, your anxiety has reached yet another peak. You've been unable to sleep at night because you stay awake the whole time wishing you were back home with your wife and kids. You see the doctor the next day and he diagnoses you with nostalgia. Symptoms being anxiety, homesickness, disordered eating, feelings of frustration and alienation, and insomnia. For 2 centuries, nostalgia manifested itself as something we understand today as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. However, it was not always used the way we use it today. As language throughout time and culture has progressed, nostalgia has come to mean something different today. In fact, the original definition of the word was a morbid longing to return to one's home or native country, severe homesickness considered as a disease. Whereas take today's definition, a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. When looking at history, the biggest examples of documented nostalgia cases are in the Swiss mercenaries and the US soldiers in the Civil War. The Union Army suffered roughly 5,213 cases, with 58 of them being fatal. In 19th century France, medical academics tried in earnest to figure out what exactly nostalgia was. There were around 80 medical dissertations on the subject, and it was the second most studied mental disease after hysteria. I have no idea how I have never heard of this. Stumbling upon this, I had to quadruple check that this was all in fact true, because I was thoroughly convinced it may have been fiction. But yeah, it all checks out. Let me know if you've ever heard of this before. But so speaking of fiction, next stop, the movie industry. The year is 2018. You arrive at the movie theater parking lot, which you find is packed to the brim. With cars wrapped all the way around the building, you finally find a spot. As you make your way into the theater, you are careful to distract yourself from listening in on other people's conversations, with the fear that something might get spoiled. The atmosphere feels electric from everyone's anticipation. You grab your popcorn and find your way to your theater. Almost every single theater room seems to be showing the same film. Squeezing through a row filled with people, you get to your seat, one of the few remaining. The excitement is now really starting to set in. The lights go down, and the theater goes quiet. The screen lights up, and you're transported to the middle of space. The previously buzzing atmosphere drops to a horror, as you and the rest of the theater look at the piles of bodies on the spaceship floor. And there he is, Thanos. Disney left its mark on the world with the release of Infinity War back in 2018. And even though it's not too far into our distant pasts.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
And even though it's not too far into our distant pasts. Fucking hell, man. And even though it's not too far into our distant paths. And even though it's not too far into our distant paths. Can I please just say the fucking word? Like, can I just be imbued? Oh my fuck. And even though it's not too far into our distant paths, I give up. I'm literally going to rewrite this so it's not using that word. And even though it was not that long ago, when surveying friends and family about their most nostalgic movie theater experiences, there seemed to be a trend that this movie somehow already had implanted itself into the memories in that way, even though in the grand scheme of things, it hadn't been that long. If you have been paying attention to anything relating to movies within the past several years, you'll have noticed that there have been the consistent rebooting or remaking of older franchises and classic movies.
Do you feel it's necessary to remake any movie? And if so, what's a RoboCop remake going to be?
No, to redo movies, like some of the great movies, is really...
sinful.
It is.
There should be a list of 25 movies that you should not ever touch.
And while some of these may benefit from having a second go, a majority of them lack any significant or deep purpose to its revival or remake. The story has already been told, and in most of these classical movies, it has already been told well. The newer versions do offer improved graphics and occasionally interesting new twists, but their main attraction that allows these remakes to reel in as many viewers as it does is the nostalgia that people have with these films. As someone who loves writing and has loved the movie industry since I was a kid, I get the appeal to wanting to stick with what they know works, and with what they know will make money. I definitely think there are the executives that just want to use these IPs to reel in viewers without having to go through the trouble of laying down foundations for something entirely new, because making entirely new stories from the ground up requires a whole new foundation to be laid down, which is a lot of work and time that doesn't always pay off. But to be as good faith as I can, storytelling reflects where humanity is, but also helps push humanity to where it aspires to be. So part of the appeal to remake these stories would be to change it to better reflect where the culture is today. For as pumped out and as uninspiring as some of these remakes can feel at times, I do find it important to remind myself and others that there are many artists within the current movie industry that are extremely passionate about their work and their stories. Even though there may be project leaders whose main focus is money, there are dozens and dozens of artists across the making of a film that are truly passionate about their work and just don't have a say in the final product. And I think it's important to differentiate the two. But either way, it's no question that nostalgia is extremely popular in our current film industry. It's present in more subtle ways and in films that aren't even remakes. Nostalgic ideas influence films that aren't necessarily related to a franchise by using older tropes and cliches that can feel familiar to us. Things that are predictable often find themselves continuing throughout films and time. So it's with no surprise that movies know how to use that feeling of nostalgia to get you to see their newer films. But this is not just a reserved practice for our movie industry. This is happening in marketing at large. Whether it be in the video game industry, the movie industry, fashion industry, sport industry, or you name it, nostalgia is everywhere in our marketing. That part of you within nostalgia that has the desire to go back to the past, that is the main point of weakness that many companies target when making their advertisements.
Nostalgia is truly one of the great human weaknesses, second only to the neck.
They ingrain it into their products or service that by buying their goods, you will be able to experience a bit of that past. And even though that's literally not possible, that's the trick. They understand that it is their most powerful marketing tool. It was when researching nostalgia and marketing that I was able to get some answers for my question about how long ago does something have to be nostalgic. I found some pretty conflicting information. Many people tried to declare an exact time, like 10 years or 20 years, etc. But when only including input from resources that had a few more legs to stand on, like researchers who have focused on this their entire career, I was able to find some consensus there. And to answer it, well, nostalgia could really be anything that happened in the past. Like, it could literally be yesterday, because it just requires a longing for something that took place in the past. That's it. So if, let's say yesterday, you had the most amazing trip to a water park with all of your friends, and today you're looking back at it with a longing for it, technically it's possible for that to be definitionally nostalgic. Rare, but possible. However, what changes throughout time is the power level of that nostalgia. People can be nostalgic about experiences from any period of their lives, but it is things from our childhood and adolescence that are particularly powerful. And that's why very frequently in these advertisements, you will see portrayals of childhood. So in the future, keep an eye out for how companies may be trying to sway you by using nostalgia. If you see children playing or things that you recognize from youth, those are the strongest indicators that they're trying to do so. But nostalgia isn't always used with such bad intentions. When doing research, I learned that nostalgia actually has some pretty cool healing powers. If you know someone who suffers from dementia, you'll know firsthand how much of a serious disease it is. One of the key features of the illness is having a poor memory. Poor enough that in many cases of severe dementia, it becomes difficult and at times impossible to be able to tell the patient that they have dementia and for them to retain that information. But within recent years, there has been the integration of purposefully using nostalgia catered to the individual patient depending on their age, to help them in their treatment.
There seems to be a trend these days of introducing nostalgia into the dementia treatment process. For example, playing music that brings back a memory that stimulates the brain again. So tell us about what you think about this nostalgia trend.
Well, I think nostalgia is really important, and to me it all gets back into social engagement. How do we engage better? And so music is extremely powerful, just as our possessions are. They trigger moments, and it's that emotion that really is which is valuable. It's not so much the item that gets us there, but it's getting us back to that content, happy state.
A small study, done with only 67 participants, was able to find a direct correlation between having patients revisit a nostalgic memory, either through music, pictures, or auditory descriptions, and the patient following that session expressing more self-esteem and self-continuity. And the most important factor here being that they were able to, on average, retain when told that they had dementia. The reason why the neuroscience field believes this works is because despite their cognitive impairment, people living with dementia experience nostalgia in similar ways to cognitively healthy adults. In simple terms, this is most likely because the creative part of the brain is one of the last parts to go. And when it comes to memory, nostalgia performs a tricky and smart maneuver: feeling. Nostalgia is truly a place where feeling and memory become one. So it is through the recollection of feeling that a dementia patient is able to recall a memory. The feeling comes first, and that is the most fascinating part to me. It circumvents the need for the patient to try to recall something from their memory the way we understand it. It has scientists questioning if memory can reach further than the hippocampus, and perhaps why we find the feeling of nostalgia as strongly as we do. So, to end this video, I wanted to make something that might shoot a bit of dopamine into your system, just in case you're having some trouble sleeping. And remember that eventually your future self will be looking back at you now with the same feeling that you look back at little you. So maybe the present's where the party's really at. Thanks for watching.
People underestimate the power of nostalgia.